Everyone you know is impacted. Everyone you know is touched by these programs and touched by this budget, and it's going to feel it.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
I wanted to talk a little bit more about the bill, the big, beautiful bill, that Trump or that Elon Musk thinks is still too generous to poor people. There was a good article that the RSA, the Retirement Systems of Alabama, put out about the effects that it would have on Alabama's economy, and so this is obviously going to be relevant for most states, especially states where folks are going to be listening to us. Adam, can you talk to us about what the RSA had to say about the potential economic impacts of this article on Alabama's of this bill on Alabama's economy?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Retirement Systems of Alabama puts out their monthly advisor, their newsletter every month, and I always pay attention to that because there's some interesting things in there. And in particular, for June, there was an article by Joe Adams from Parka titled, "Wow, Alabama's $60 billion question." And he said Alabama relies on federal spending. Alabama residents do too. Alabama residents receive over $60 billion from the federal government. That's 23% of all personal income in the state. And, these payments, the transfer payments, include various things: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, unemployment, Pell Grants, other stuff. And between an aging population, shrinking economic opportunities, there's, different factors involved, but the bottom line is that a lot of people are very reliant on these federal transfer payments. So to put the $60 billion in perspective, Alabama's 4 automakers generate $6.4 billion in total compensation, right? That's about 1/10 the amount received from federal transfer payments. In other words, a 10% reduction in these payments would have a similar economic effect on personal income as shuttering Alabama's entire auto industry. And I thought that was really remarkable to think about that. If 10% of federal payments were cut to Alabamians, that would be the equivalent of shutting down Toyota, Mazda, Mercedes, Hyundai, the entire auto industry in the state. That is a remarkable impact that we're looking at. And the article also goes on to note that the impact is more pronounced in rural areas. And, it tends to be much more, there tends to be much more reliance on these federal transfer payments in rural areas than larger population centers. And what you see is that it's actually accelerated over the recent decades. And so it's more and more of a rural reliance. Which sort of makes sense when you think about it. There's less job opportunities often in rural areas, and there tends to be, less of a middle class, quote unquote, in many of those areas. And so I just thought it was relevant to put out there how reliant we are, because we often talk about how reliant the state of Alabama and many southern states, how reliant we are on federal spending. Right here, we are in the Tennessee Valley, right? Many folks are familiar with TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. We are in Huntsville, Alabama, the Rocket City, which is incredibly reliant on the federal sector. NASA, as well as the military-industrial complex, employs a whole lot of people here. Many, many people you meet in this community are connected to federal jobs, whether they're a contractor or a direct federal employee at NASA, the Corps of Engineers, other agencies. But, we often don't think about the just cumulative effect of all these different transfer payments and all the different benefits that folks are relying on just to make ends meet, just to survive. How many folks are out there who are totally reliant on getting that Social Security check every month, or who depend on those SNAP benefits to feed their kids every month. And so I think that was helpful to put it in context that the $60 billion that Alabamians receive in these transfer payments, again, is about 10 times bigger than the amount of income generated from the auto industry, which Governor Kay Ivey has said is the crown jewel of Alabama, right? They have generously subsidized the auto industry in this state. They have come, to their defense anytime workers have tried to organize at, facilities like Hyundai or Mercedes. You see the Alabama political class, the business class, the elites go running to the media. They start renting billboard space. They run commercials. They organize vote no campaigns. They fight really, really hard against workers organizing. But, I think it's just, it's worth reflecting on how this bill, this, budget reconciliation bill, really will impact everyone. Everyone. Even if you are not directly on Medicaid, the attacks on Medicaid, the attacks on the Affordable Care Act, the attacks on SNAP, the food stamps benefits, and others will absolutely impact all of us. Just this week, there was a letter put out by Cover Alabama Coalition, and the North Alabama Area Labor Council was one of over 50 groups to sign on to this letter. It went to the lawmakers of Alabama, right, our state legislators and our governor, to let them know they should be speaking out as well against these harmful cuts in the U.S. House's budget reconciliation bill. And the folks who signed on to this letter were asking the state policymakers to contact members of Congress and express their concerns about the bill's negative impact, both on Alabama's families and Alabama's budget. Because another piece to this is that if this bill were to pass as it is currently written, the state of Alabama would be in the hole millions and millions and millions of dollars for next year's budget, right? And that is going to be a whole nother thing, a whole nother can of worms to get into next legislative session. So ultimately, it is an impact on the states. It's an impact on everyday working class people, because most everyone is touched by these federal programs. Again, even if you directly are not on Medicaid, someone who is relying on Medicaid, whether it's someone who has an elderly parent in a nursing home or a grandparent in a nursing home relying on Medicaid, whether it's, the teenage mother who gave birth paid for by Medicaid, folks who are struggling with disabilities who are relying on Medicaid. And then there's the cuts to the Affordable Care Act subsidies, because I know a lot of working class people, the only way they've had health care the last few years was through those subsidies to the Affordable Care Act. And, I can speak personally to members of my union, IATSE Local 900. And I know this is not unique to our local. We do gig work. And so we do not have health care provided through a collective bargaining agreement, unfortunately, which I know is the case for many union members. And so our members rely on the marketplace. Either they work another job that provides health care, or they purchase it on the ACA marketplace. And it's really devastating, because many of our members are low income enough to where they would qualify for Medicaid were it expanded in this state. But Alabama, of course, is one of, about 10 states or so to not expand Medicaid, which, by the way, is also something else that is under attack in this bill. They're going to make it that much harder to expand Medicaid. They are basically disincentivizing the expansion of Medicaid through this bill. A couple of other just notes. For one thing, obviously, what is behind all these cuts? Well, some of it, frankly, is just to renew tax cuts for wealthy people and highly profitable corporations. It is ultimately a transfer of wealth. Take wealth from poor people and working class people, and transfer it up. But it's going to make healthcare in Alabama specifically, the attacks to the ACA subsidies are going to make healthcare less affordable for over 400,000 Alabamians who are currently relying on that. It's also going to cost about 10,000 jobs, as well as over $1 billion in GDP in 2026. Right, so that's a huge economic impact. This kind of austerity could potentially tank our economy here in the state, and obviously not exclusive to Alabama, but the threats to health coverage in Alabama would not end there. If enacted, the bill would cost Alabama about $619 million in extra federal funding that would have helped cover the first 2 years of Medicaid expansion. So that's over $600 million we could have brought into our state, into our economy, that could have been circulating here in Alabama. That's not going to make it if this bill goes through. The jobs, right? And we always hear politicians love to brag about jobs, including some of the very same politicians who are proposing this bill that actually destroys jobs. People will lose their jobs. And it's not just people who work directly for Medicaid or Medicare, right? Think about the example of the nursing home, right? It is a very common experience that many of us are going to have parents or grandparents at some point or another who are going to have to go into some sort of facility. It's a reality that is tough to deal with, and most of us are going to deal with that reality at some point in our lives. And many working class families have to have a combination of Medicare and Medicaid to survive those family situations. But also, the people working in these facilities, right? How many jobs are going to be cut when these benefits are cut? Because that's how folks are paying for these services.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
A couple of other things I wanted to mention. It's going to freeze provider taxes, which is ultimately going to limit the state's future options for funding Medicaid by effectively forbidding legislators to increase fees on nursing homes, ambulance services, and other providers. So it doesn't just take health coverage away from low-income families. It does do that, but it also strips the state of the tools, flexibility, and funding needed to manage the state's Medicaid program. The bill would reduce retroactive Medicaid coverage period from 3 months to just 1. This change would leave many pregnant women and other Alabamians in greater medical and financial risk. It also would undermine a new law that the legislature just passed this year to remove red tape barriers to Medicaid coverage for thousands of expectant mothers. That was a good bill. We talked about it on the show. Representative Marilyn Land sponsored that legislation. It's not anything radical. It's not a huge breakthrough, but basically it just streamlines the process so that a pregnant Alabamian can get on Medicaid quicker and can get to prenatal care quicker, can go to the doctor when they need to go to the doctor, can get medication that they need so that the mother and the child can be healthy and just have a better step towards a better life. So, all of these things are under threat. We also know that, the food stamps are under threat as well, which, again, is not just going to impact the people and families and children, and it's many, many, many children who rely on this. It's also going to impact the stores, the grocery stores, the farmers, everyone who's involved in the food industry. Because, again, millions of people across this country rely on these programs just to feed their families. And it's not even that these are super generous. If anything, the safety net that we have in place in the United States is far inferior to what we see in many other developed countries. It is a lot harder to be poor in America than it is in many other countries across this planet. And it's about to be a lot harder. So I just wanted to put that out there. This is going to have a huge impact on Alabama from our communities, our working class families, but also the state itself is going to be in a real bind. It sets up a huge budget fight and tax fight next year. It also, is going to be a variable for the 2026 election. As with many places, we don't just have congressional elections next year. Our entire state government virtually is up for election, from the governor to the attorney general, all the way to every single member of the state House of Representatives and state Senate. So the entire legislature is up for election. We've already heard a lot of chatter about Senator Tommy Tuberville running for governor in Alabama. Many people consider him to be the, far ahead favorite already at this point. Of course, there's a lot of questions because he doesn't actually live in Alabama, based on a lot of the reporting that we've seen. So that could be a problem for him. But we've never seen, here lately, the rules don't seem to be much of a barrier for folks in politics. But that's going to be setting up an interesting fight with Tuberville because he's kind of in a bind, right? Does he vote for this bill knowing he wants to be governor next year and knowing it's going to tank his state's economy and his state's budget? That's a predicament to be in, right? Because he wants to please Trump. He very much is... I won't say what I was going to say. We're on the radio, but he likes to be in Trump's good graces, right? Senator Tuberville is very, very passionate about that, and he's got something to decide. The future of the state he wants to run versus his political relationship with the president. But I think it's really important that everyday folks be reaching out to their senator. I know it can feel like an uphill battle. It may feel like it's a waste of time, but believe me, they do take a tally of those phone calls, of those emails, of those letters and postcards, of those constituent visits. And there is, an overall impact that can be made. With enough pressure, politicians will change course. Even some of the worst, most reactionary politicians can vote for decent legislation or not vote for terrible legislation on occasion with enough public pressure from their constituents. So those of you who have not made any phone calls or reached out to your senator lately, put it on your calendar. Put a regular reminder. Check in with them every couple days, if nothing else. Make some phone calls to the D.C. office as well as their local offices in Alabama. You're probably only going to talk to a staffer, if anyone, if you actually get a hold of anyone. I would just encourage you to, don't cuss out the staffer. That's not going to help your case. But do let them know how these cuts will impact you and your family and the people you care about and your loved ones. Whether it is elderly folks, whether it's children, whether it's the working class folks in your community, in your neighborhood, it's going to hurt everybody. And, we've talked about some of the other aspects to the bill. You mentioned briefly earlier the cuts to energy jobs, right? So there are a lot of folks whose jobs are on the line. We've also mentioned recently the AI preemption that is in this bill that is very much irritating entertainment industry unions like IATSE, because what the bill would do is prevent states and localities from doing anything around AI, right? It is a federal preemption. They do not want state and local governments, red states, blue states, Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. The way it's written, none of them would have the authority to do anything about AI, which, as we talked about the other day, everyone wants us to believe AI is a game changer. It's going to change the world, change the economy. It's a new industrial revolution kind of technology. And this bill would prevent our own local and state officials from doing anything about it, no matter how passionate we may be. And so there are a lot of issues with this legislation. It is clearly a transfer of wealth to the top. It is a deep, deep attack on the working class and on the poorest among us. And it's going to just lower the floor. And that's something we were talking about yesterday with a group of folks. It's going to lower the floor of just basic living standards in this country. And we're going to have a lot more people that much more desperate, right? So even if you think you're pretty insulated from this, maybe you don't participate in any of these federal programs, maybe none of your immediate family does, you're absolutely going to be impacted by the economic impact of these cuts and job losses. You're going to be impacted by the impact on the state budget. You're going to feel it. You're going to notice that. And so we're going to see entire industries under attack, like the entire healthcare industry is going to be impacted by these cuts. So really important just to be organizing, to be talking to folks, let people know the facts, let people know what's really going on. It isn't too late. It is not too late to stop this thing. There have always been bad ideas that have been proposed that have not made it through. And so I think that's kind of the hope at this point. Talking to advocates who are, experts on Medicaid and SNAP and these other benefits, a lot of them actually expected the bill to be even worse than it was. And that is honestly thanks to the pressure they've already received. We've already seen some Republican lawmakers kind of waffle on some of these cuts. Even Tuberville himself has made some interesting statements about, Medicaid, Medicare, and those sorts of things. So there's a lot of opportunity. I'm not saying it's the only thing you should be doing, because obviously we're a union talk show. We love to organize workers. We think building power as working class people is our way forward. But advocacy is an important tool in our toolbox. And it's important that we're reaching out, that they hear from regular folks, from union people, from working class people, from people who benefit from these programs and people who don't. So that is my homework for all of you, is to get in touch with your senator, let them know how you feel about this. It has already passed the House, so the Senate is the focus. And if your member of the House supported this legislation, you should get in touch with them as well and find out why and get some answers, because it's really, really one of the most devastating attacks on the working class we've seen in some time. And you put it in the context of these other attacks we've been reporting on in the last few months, attacks on our rights to organize, and our rights to have a union contract, which are under threat, our rights to just live peaceably in our neighborhoods, right, without fear of deportation or, crackdowns on free speech. It's just really disturbing to see this kind of austerity budget in that context, right, which makes it all the more worse. So I just encourage folks to get involved and learn more about what's happening and find ways to educate your neighbors about it. Because, again, everyone is impacted. Everyone is touched by these programs and touched by this budget, and is going to feel it.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.